When we talk about the conflict in Kashmir, we usually hear words like dispute, stalemate, maybe even tragedy. But what if we've been looking at it all wrong? What if the situation isn't some problem that both sides have just failed to solve? What if, instead, it's a system that's actually working exactly as intended? That's the really provocative idea we're going to dig into.
And that quote right there, that's the core idea from the analysis we're exploring. It completely reframes the conflict. It suggests that for both India and Pakistan, the endless tension isn't some kind of diplomatic failure. It's a strategic asset. And that, of course, raises one huge question. Why? Why on earth would keeping this conflict alive be more valuable than peace?
Okay, so to get to the bottom of that why, we first need to understand what this system really is. We're about to break down how Kashmir functions not just as, a piece of contested land, but as a critical tool that actually serves the most fundamental interests of both nations.
So here's the key concept, a strategic instrument. The whole argument here is that Kashmir has become something both India and Pakistan use to achieve much bigger goals. Goals tied to their national identity, their domestic politics, and even their military power. See, the objective isn't necessarily to win the territory. It's to use the conflict itself.
And maybe the most powerful way they use it is to build and maintain their own national identities. This conflict is, it's deeply woven into the very stories India and Pakistan tell about themselves, who they are, what their purpose is, and why they even exist.
And this slide just lays it out so clearly, how Kashmir plays these perfectly symmetrical, yet totally opposite roles. For India, holding on to Muslim-majority Kashmir is held up as absolute proof of its identity as a secular, multi-ethnic country. Letting go wouldn't just challenge that idea, it could open a Pandora's box of other movements. Now, on the flip side, for Pakistan, the conflict is the ultimate proof of its founding two-nation theory, the idea that Muslims needed their own homeland. It's also the main reason the military has such a powerful, central role in the country.
And of course, this logic of national identity translates directly into domestic politics. In both countries, taking a hard line on Kashmir is a surefire way to rally support and get out the vote. Any leader who even hints at compromise is risking their political career. They'll be called weak or worse, a traitor. This creates this incredible pressure for leaders on both sides to just keep things as they are. The stalemate isn't just foreign policy, it's a tool for political survival. So you've got this political pressure cooker, right? And that builds into a much bigger strategic logic. Look, if real peace is politically toxic, and all-out war is absolutely catastrophic, especially with nuclear weapons in the mix, then suddenly a managed frozen conflict can start to look like a weirdly rational, maybe even beneficial option. And this really is the million-dollar question, isn't it? If a country's main goal is just stability and its own self-interest, how could an endless, simmering conflict ever be better than just solving it? Well, the answer, according to this analysis, is that the stalemate itself is incredibly, if grimly, useful. A stalemate creates what you could call controlled tension. It lets both sides dial the pressure up or down when they need to without risking a full-blown war. It gives them leverage on the world stage. Pakistan uses it to try and get international attention, while India uses its control on the ground to make the status quo seem normal. And then, of course, you throw nuclear weapons into the mix, and that just locks the whole system in place. War is too risky, but peace is too politically disruptive. So this managed instability becomes the default setting, something even the big global powers seem to prefer because it avoids a major blowup. And to make things even more complicated, you have what the source calls the asymmetry problem. Think about it. India controls most of the territory, so for them, the best play is just to wait it out, to let time make the current situation feel permanent. Pakistan, on the other hand, can't accept that reality, but it doesn't have the power to force a change. This imbalance means there's basically zero common ground for a real negotiation. So far, we've been talking in the cold, rational language of geopolitics. But this system isn't some abstract game being played on a map. It has a real, profound, and devastating human cost. And that cost is paid, overwhelmingly, by the Kashmiri people themselves. This is where the logic of the system smacks right into a tragic human reality. Just let that line sink in for a second. It's incredibly stark. What it's saying is that for this whole system to function, for it to keep providing those benefits to both India and Pakistan, the actual desires of the Kashmiri people have to be suppressed. Any form of genuine self-determination for Kashmiris would wreck the strategic goals of both countries. Their agency isn't a feature of this system. It's a bug that needs to be controlled. So, what would it actually take to tear this system down and find peace?
Well, this slide lays out the massive costs. First, both nations would have to rewrite their own founding stories. Then, the entire balance of power between civilians and the military, especially in Pakistan, would be thrown into chaos. Leaders would have to somehow sell what would look like a massive political defeat to their people. And, maybe the biggest one of all, they'd have to put the interests of Kashmiris first. When you stack all that up, you start to see why just managing the conflict, as awful as it is, looks like the path of least resistance. And that really brings us to the core takeaway of this entire analysis. The fact that the Kashmir conflict continues isn't because of bad luck or misunderstandings or incompetent diplomats. No, it's the logical, rational result of a system where the key players actually benefit more from the conflict than they would from solving it. This one sentence just perfectly captures the whole grim logic of this deliberately unresolved system. For the state institutions in both New Delhi and Islamabad, the political, strategic, and institutional price tag on a real, lasting peace is just seen as being way too high. From their point of view, just managing the conflict is cheaper. So, this brings us to our final, unavoidable question. This whole analysis makes a pretty compelling case for a system that is, from the perspective of the states involved, quite stable and rational. But if the states themselves aren't paying the ultimate price for this stability, well, then who is?
Subscribe now for more conflict breakdowns.